This is the Guided Podcast, an interview with the fly fishing industry's top guides and brand ambassadors. On this podcast, we cover topics such as the guiding lifestyle, conservation, different fisheries globally, and gear and technology to improve your game. I'm your show host, Greg Keenan. Before we begin today's show, let's thank our sponsors. Scientific Anglers is the leader in producing the world's best fly lines for over 75 years. Scientific Anglers have set new industry standards with their SA Amplitude family of fly lines, both in technology and performance. See the difference for yourself today at scientificanglers.com. Show your show support and follow us on Instagram at Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to Guided. Today our guest is Hilary Hutcheson. Hilary, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Super excited you're here. You're definitely a household name in fly fishing. So I think what I want to do is get back to the point of where you started off and how you got into fly fishing. And if you could, walk us through that moment.
Right. Well, I always talk about how it was not so much about the fish, but the water, because I live in Northwest Montana. So we're surrounded by water. If you fly over it, it looks like a delta. I mean, there's just tons of rivers and lakes and streams and ponds and there's just kind of water everywhere. So having that be part of your life where I live in Northwest Montana is a really natural part of growing up here. So my parents both kind of had the outlook that kids can and should be on the loose here growing up in this area. And so my sister and brother and I really were. So we just explored at a big level. Like, you know, this is big sky country, of course, and we're kind of in this cool valley that just has very accessible mountains and, again, the rivers and streams and trails and just back roads. And so we were just kind of all over the place and naturally ended up on the water. And that was actual exploration. So my sister and I started reading water and learning whitewater at a very young age, and not necessarily because we had somebody to teach us, but because we had parents who let us go and do it. And so they provided us with the proper safety gear. So we were kind of always the kids wearing life jackets at an early age before other kids were wearing life jackets, or we were wearing helmets skiing and riding our bikes when other kids kind of thought it wasn't cool, because we knew if we got hurt, our parents wouldn't let us do it anymore. So we kind of started getting really brave and running the river when we were young and starting to learn, you know, kind of by default how to read water. And then we became pretty proficient just and comfortable rowing. And when I say rowing, we didn't have an adipose or anything like that back then. So anything that we could float down the river, we would. And so once, you know, we kind of started to see that there are a lot of things to do out there in the river, we happened to stumble across some fly rods, you know, just in a friend's shed. I had a buddy who had some fly rods that his uncle had. We were just messing around with them and started just kind of catching fish. So that was in like 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th grade. We were just started fishing a ton and catching a bunch of fish and just kind of got good at it that way. And we always joke about it because we didn't, you know, really talk about it. It was just like super fun. We would just go fishing all the time in the summertime, riding our bikes, again, floating on a leaky inflatable kayak, and being successful at it. So, like, you know, you start kind of just getting good at it. You start to ask more and more questions, and then start to ask people who know. And we would ride our bikes into Snappy Sports Center in Kalispell, like 30 miles away from where we live, to go ask them questions. And pretty soon we got jobs as raft guides in high school. And then after that, A River Runs Through It came out, and which I guess is like 26 years ago. And then suddenly everybody wanted to fly fish. And so our raft company offered fly fishing, but it wasn't super in demand. And then suddenly it was. And so we started guiding fly fishing. So it was really fun. Loved it. And I think it felt like it was something that we could do, that we are capable of, because we could read water, and so you could put people on fish. So it was, and the fish here, cutthroat, native West Slope cutthroat, and they eat, and so it worked out. It wasn't too challenging in the beginning, other than just kind of being young and small, and trying to gain people's trust early on. And because we could run water, they, I think, felt like they were safe, which is good. That's kind of how we got started. And then, well, my sister guided for a long, long time. We got to guide together, which is awesome. I got out of it a couple different times, and got other jobs and kept coming back to it, and finally came back and stayed back. And I still work and guide for the same company, Glacier Anglers, out of West Glacier, but I also have my own shop in town in Columbia Falls, which is just downriver from West Glacier, and guide out of there as well.
Awesome, Hilary. That's a ton of content, and I think which is good. I think what I want to do is I want to ask you, like, for those that don't know, and I mean myself here, what is the river that you're guiding on?
So we're on the Flathead River system, and that's the southern boundary to Glacier National Park and the western boundary to Glacier National Park, and then coming out of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. So the middle fork of the Flathead is the southern boundary of Glacier National Park, and the north fork of the Flathead is the western boundary to Glacier National Park, and then the south fork of the Flathead meets up after the other two meet up. It comes and meets up with it just below the Hungry Horse Reservoir. So it's not really it's not a tailwater we guide. The Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, of course, is in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Protection Act, which is also same as the North Fork and the Middle Fork. And so we're very lucky that we have 3 rivers that are federally protected under Wild and Scenic, and all just kind of right here in this zone. So, yeah.
Absolutely, for sure. You know what, Hilary, you also mentioned in that little snippet or intro there that you had other jobs. What were some of those other jobs that you did prior to, like, you would leave, come back, leave and come back? You were mentioning. What were some of those other jobs?
Right. Well, I went to college for journalism, and so I became a news anchor. So I was a TV news anchor in Portland, Oregon, and in Missoula, Montana. And I, did that for a few years in Missoula, and then 5 years in Portland, and then moved back here. After that, I did some public relations. I did public relations in Portland for about a year, and then I started a PR marketing agency with my ex-husband here in Montana as well, and had a television show called Trout TV. And I loved doing that, because with the TV show, the premise was that I would go and learn from guides on their specific water. So you really got to key in to a guide's home water where they were guiding, and they felt so passionate about it. And anytime you ask a guide, what's your favorite water, they always say their home water.
Yeah.
So it was just fun to go, it would be something like maybe that you drive by off the interstate all the time, like the Cle Elum or the Yakima or something like that in Washington, and you get deep down into it and learn from the guides, really how to fish it. And they'd be open about talking about public access and how people can get out there and fish it. These aren't guides who are like hiding the fly, putting a different fly in their hat to make people think that's what they were using when they're actually using something else. These are guides who are really open about helping people be successful on the water, instead of letting people just go out there and slap water and have a terrible experience. So even if people weren't hiring a guide, in my personal opinion, and in the opinion a lot of these guides that we had on the TV show, is that you just want people to fish well so that they can protect the resource, so that they can have a good experience, so that they're not just tromping around on reds or just slapping water or getting hung up in yanking flies out of trees, and kind of overall better, more thoughtful fishing. And so they were giving a lot of that great information to people who were just watching TV.
Yeah, it's super important to educate and pass that along as well, right? For sure. So I love what you guys are doing with that. So Hilary, you also mentioned that when you were guiding you, you've been guiding for the same company as well as you have your own company.
Hmm.
How long have you been with the same
Yep.
company now?
Yeah. Well, I started up at Glacier Anglers. Um, when I was 14, I started babysitting the owner's kids and pulling weeds and washing boats and backing trailers and kind of doing all those odd jobs, making breakfast for the bed and breakfast. So that was when I was 14 and 15 and then started, once I was in high school, started training for whitewater, started doing whitewater through high school. And then for the end of high school and into the beginning of college is when we started guiding fly fishing. And so that was, I'm 43 now. So starting there since I was, in junior high and high school. Yeah, that's a couple decades. It's a long time ago that I first started there. And like I said, I left, got other jobs, was away for it for a little. Every time I came back, I just was almost like checking to see if I still really loved it. And I did. And I always missed it. So finally just committed to coming back for good. I don't know, about a decade ago or so. So yeah, back to full time. And even though it's a full time job, it's a shorter season than a lot of people might have, just because we have they call a shorter growing season up here in the Flathead. So we have a pretty good little spring season, and then we blow out. And we're blowing out this week pretty much for the next couple weeks probably, and which is bad timing because we've just been allowed to guide again after the lockdown, and then we can guide into through October. I think the last few years I've had trips into October. In fact, some people like to come in November knowing that the fishing might not be as great, or it might not be as tolerable with the temperatures, but they just want to kind of be out on the river. So yeah, so it's we don't have a ton of things to do on the river in like November, December, January, February, but start to come March, we start to see some fish moving back up the system from the big lake and from their trips.
Awesome. Hilary, here's where I'm going to go with this. You get many, many, many years, like you said, decades of guiding and whatnot. When you're reading water, like walk us through that, because I think that's important to highlight. Like a lot of people that are on the river, what do they like? Like I know it's you put a lifetime into this or decades into this, but just really briefly, what are some of the key highlight points of reading water, and what should anglers look for to make sure they're successful?
Right. Yeah, well, for starters, if you're in a boat or if you're doing a walkway situation, safety is number one. Every time you approach the river, or even the lake for that matter, it's just looking at where you can wade or where you can put yourself in the boat and your people in the boat. That's gonna be safe. And just kind of starting my fishing career as a whitewater guide, it made me become kind of my specialty is kind of whitewater fly fishing. So I'm always thinking about when I'm, for example, a big stretch that I fish here is the commercial whitewater stretch, and that's where a lot of the whitewater raft boats go for fun, and we fish that area. And then also up high in the Great Bear Wilderness, we do multi-day trips and the wilderness trips, and I also guide on the Middle Fork of the Salmon. Of course, that's big whitewater too. So for me, safety is the main point. How can you be able to stay alive so you can go and do this again? And what you're looking for in that situation is what comes after you get to the fish. How can you get there? How can you maintain that spot? And then what happens next? It's always kind of looking ahead. So one thing that I do all the time is I fish the river in what I call problems or projects, kind of like a climbing situation where people are doing a climbing problem, and they have a goal that they want to reach this piece on the rock or on the wall or whatever. And it's like kind of that route of how you're going to get there. So I stop my boat way far above where I think that we're going to have some success fishing. And I talk to my people about here's kind of what's going to happen. And it can be super dynamic and fun and crazy and exciting in that I'll say, okay, so we're going to go, maybe 15 yards, and then you're going to do 2 false casts and put that fly down by that old log there. If it pushes out, I want you to give it 3 strips, pick it back up, back cast. You're going to probably have 3 more seconds of drift. If the fish doesn't eat there, I want you to roll cast it back behind the log. Then we're going to get about 5 more seconds. I'm going to pull back into the eddy, and we're going to go and session it again. And it sounds like that could be really intense. And then you just talk about it a little bit, put it all together, and suddenly it happens. And you're like, no freaking way. That was awesome.
You were just getting
and so
pumped.
It makes it very exciting. Yeah. I mean, it's like, so that's kind of the style that I have personally in fly fishing. It's a little more adrenaline, exciting. Even when we're fishing the saltwater sections, I fish it like that. I just think it's better than like the spray and pray style of guiding. So especially with kind of a whitewater situation, you don't have much time. You've got to hit the pockets. I don't like to rip fish out of fast water. I want them to be catching them in the soft pockets, and I'm going to be like working my ass off to hold the boat so that we can get that fish scooped and back into that same zone. So there's a lot that has to happen there. And everybody kind of has to be on. It's super fun and exciting. And safe, again, with safety, that's key. So a couple other things are like, when I say you're thinking about what's going to happen next after you catch that fish, what if that fish wants to stay in that pocket? Your boat's ripping downriver. It runs up into the pocket under the boat. Now you've got your rod just bent to breaking point under the rod, and your angler is like turned around backwards as you're trying to move the boat so that you have a good angle to try to kind of get the fish scooped, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose and things are falling out of the boat. Somebody drops their rod. I mean, so many things can go wrong. So just talking about it ahead of time is something I encourage anybody, any guide, but also just any private angler to do. Like really maintain your expectations for what you want to happen, and then what is likely to happen and what can go wrong.
Absolutely. It's definitely good to have that little debrief ahead of time. So, Hilary, it's funny what you mentioned about the pockets and whatnot. Now, when you're fishing those pockets and you're trying to like get your clients to cast or hit those pockets and the fish are down deeper, walk us through your setup? Like, how are you getting the fly appropriately to that area?
Yeah. So in terms of the actual rig up, I'm using heavier and shorter setup than you would think. So in terms of the rod, that's going to be pretty standard. So we're using 9-foot 5 weights or 9-foot 6 weights. And a lot of times people would say, why are you using a 6 weight for kind of those smaller cutthroat? Which my answer to that is we have big fish in the system. One of the magic of this area is that you can expect to catch a smaller fish and then you'll lay into a monster. They're definitely out there. And when we're fishing well, like we have very good odds that we're going to get into that zone that fish hasn't seen, fly before, or hasn't had, an angler be able to make it out there to get them. So I'm trying to set people up for that experience where anytime the fly hits the water, it can be the one. So we do fish a little bit heavier. And then it also has to do with, when you're talking about pound tests, talking about pounds of pressure that's kind of put on that unit until it gets to its vulnerability. And so when you're fishing whitewater, when you're fishing heavier, thicker water that's more dynamic, you're putting more pressure on that entire system. So I do use heavier leaders and tippets, even for small flies and presumably small fish. I'm fishing 4X. I never am lighter than 5X. I'll fish 5X with like my little goober midge setup I like to fish for some of the kind of softer seams, things like that. But typically I'm on 4X across the board. I'm using the Absolute Trout, the new Absolute Trout stuff that came out, the leader and tippet, and knot strength is blowing my mind. So I'm planning this season to maybe kind of go down in leader or tippet size, just because the strength of the Absolute is all time. So it's better than I've ever had before. And so I'm kind of psyched to see, maybe how far I can take it. But I also don't like to lose fish, and I don't like to we don't break off here because that's trash in our river. This is a wild and scenic river corridor, and we're only fishing for these protected species. Our target species here is native West Slope cutthroat trout, and we don't like to leave, flies in the face. So fish, whenever we're adding on, we're always using blood knots here, kind of a culture thing, but very few people are using anything other than their blood knot, from 4X maybe to 5X, but a lot of times it's even just straight 4X and short. So I'm fishing no longer than usually like an 8-foot leader in that kind of water. So we'll go longer when we hit flat water stretches. And I typically rig up a bunch of rods and hand my clients fresh rods, as opposed to like pulling over and re-rigging their stuff for a long time. I'll have, my full Orbis and SA set up kind of ready to go with 4 rods just to hand them fresh rods. Once we get out of a rapid stretch and into some flat water where we can fish a longer leader, and maybe I need to even stretch it out to 10, 11, 12 feet, I'll have that already set up with a small dry fly. And then I'll have, a lot of times in early season, I'll have a nymph rig set up, and we don't really do a ton of nymphing here. So it's super standard kind of, either just a kind of a double system with a stonefly nymph and Batman nymph, something like that, or something big to kind of weigh it down, and then any kind of small attractor style mayfly nymph. But when I say small, we never go small here, like small, like people do in Colorado. We're like 14, 12, 14, 16. Very rarely are we going smaller than 16, 18. So big stuff, just because Bloody Cuddies here, like a lot of flashy meatball subs and, stuff that they can see and go for and get spiced on. And then I'll have a small streamer rig. We don't target bull trout here, even though bull trout are in the system, but the cutthroat get pretty wild and crazy on some small streamers. So we fish some small streamers on, I fish them on a full sink in the right zone, and that's targeting the big cutthroat because a lot of times there's smaller fish in the system that'll beat the bigger fish to the fly. Mm-hmm. And so we're going down targeting some of the bigger fish. And so another way that this fishing is so dynamic is because on the boat, I'll have a big bushy dry fly rig, a little like smaller mayfly, midge dry fly rig, a full nymph rig, and a streamer rig. And then in terrestrial season, we're doing flying ants, hoppers, beetles, dry dropper kind of a situation. So it's like, whatever your heart desires.
You're super diverse, really, right? And I love the diversity that you have, and I guess like any given moment on the water, it's like, okay, they're off on this, so now it's truck streamers, right? Now they're off streamers. Let's go back to which is like exciting. I mean, when just you talking about it, I'm excited. I'm like, wow, picturing myself.
Oh, it's so fun.
Like if if you're a client, you're like, there's nothing more boring than throwing the same thing all day. So it's kind of fun to switch it up as you're going down the river, right? So and like you mentioned, like it sounds like it's fun. Absolutely,
for sure. And that it's also cool because I talk about expectations, but I like to talk to people, and if I know early on they really don't want a nymph, I'll be like, sweet, neither do I. We're going full dries all day or whatever. We can do that. So. We get to talk about it, and or if they love really intense nymphing situations, like we can rig that up too and be very successful with it. Of course, one thing about the nymphing is like we're gin clear in the height of our season. So one of the big joys of fishing here is just being able to see that fish come all the way up, like from these like Skittles rocks. It is. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. So. I do tons of sight casting situations. Like I said, I don't love kind of that spray and pray style of fishing. We'll set it up. We'll I'll talk to them about kind of why we're working in slow. A lot of times I'll get out of the boat, kind of walk the boat to a spot where I'm not going to be banging rocks, and get up and scout, stand up high and see what we can see. And then we'll watch them for a while. It can be really fun to fish like that too, of course. and a lot of times maybe fewer numbers, but that's what we want anyway, is to have a really great experience. And, I don't have a lot of people who are like, we caught a million fish, all the time. That's not what they want. I don't have people necessarily asking for that. I want to catch every fish in the river. We can. I mean, if that's what you want to do, I just don't love that. I don't think it's super good for the pressure on the fish here. And, we can, if slaying means like having an awesome day and getting the fish we want, that's what I want. Like, I'm not the person who says like, oh, even if we don't have catch fish, it's going to be awesome. I definitely want to catch fish. That's kind of, I'm still that person who wants to catch fish. I definitely, oh yeah. Like I do hear people like, oh yeah, we didn't, even if we don't catch fish, it's fine. And I'm like, it's not really fine with me. We need to catch fish. So I appreciate that people can say that, but that's not me. I still want to catch fish. We just don't need to like haul ass down the river, just false casting all day to try to catch them in every single hole. I like to plan it out and play it out a little more. But like in high water, it's kind of, as soon as it starts to not get muddy and clear up, my favorite fly to fish is the tarantula bug, which sounds ridiculous, but I love church tarantula because it'll be a dry fly on the way down, and then you can swing it, and then you can strip it in like a muddler. So you have like, again, with the super dynamic fishing in one drift, you have 3 styles of fishing with one fly. And that kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about how dynamic this zone is. You can target cutthroat in a dry fly drift, in a swing, or stripping it. So just a lot of kind of weird stuff like that.
Absolutely cool. I love it. It's funny. One of the things as a podcaster or a podcast host, is basically, I was going to ask you about conservation, and you mentioned so many times naturally about conservation and catching every fish, and how you're not really okay with that at all. You like to catch fish ethically and whatnot. And you mentioned about the bull trout as well and how they're not a targeted species. Is there any other conservation issues on your river that, that you're passionate about or something that you could share with?
Yeah. Well, we're in a zone here where, the most talked about conservation issue is where we are ground zero for, which is that, losing all our glaciers. So we've got this big climate conversation that is encircling from this zone and now is reverberated around the entire world. And so this has become this area, glacier country, this kind of crown of the continent, as it's called, has become this big global classroom for people learning about how our climate is changing and how that is impacting so many things in our ecosystem. And so because we're here and, I'm running a business and my livelihood is here, it's part of my everyday. And I'm lucky enough to be able to have the world's top climate scientists here. Have always been super bad at science and math. So it doesn't come naturally to me. So it's really lucky that I can pick up the phone, send an email, or meet them out for coffee and just ask the tough questions of our climate scientists, who have been studying this, for their entire careers. And I've been learning about it from them for actually 25 years, which is amazing. I mean, I just feel very fortunate. I also feel very helpless, because you're kind of watching these things happen before your eyes. And even though we've been watching it, we then kind of hear about it in the news, even though we're right here and saw it coming. So it can be hopefully beneficial to our ecosystem to be kind of here and involved and boots on the ground, but it also can be frustrating to still be here and see it every single day, just kind of happening. So one of the main things that I do is just, in my experience on the river every day, and then just learning from the scientists here, is kind of taking that message to testify for our local and national federal leadership, government level, just to kind of help them make, good choices, whoever that might be. So it's, something that kind of bipartisan effort is something that I fell into naturally just because I want to continue to do this. And, I had my youngest daughter had an interview with Glacier Anglers today for her summer job. And so it's a little terrifying when your own kids want to maybe kind of look into doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of one of the protectors who have been here and seen it happen since the beginning. I mean, just growing up here and with parents working in the national park system, it's really been a part of my life. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's probably the biggest conservation issue that, I'm dealing with here every day.
I hear you. No, for sure. That's kind of, obviously I didn't know that your daughter had an interview, but that's fantastic. Is it not?
Yes, she is. Both of my daughters, my oldest daughter worked at Glacier Raft Company, making the sandwiches for the guides,
Yeah.
The summer before last. And I think she may be interviewing, they do this stuff like without me because they don't want like mom to get them the job, or they don't want the job to have to really even do with me.
Yeah.
But they're interested in it. So I think they may actually both be applying there, for their summer jobs. But Delaney for sure, like, went through the application process without me and filled out her application and got an interview with the shop manager at the fly shop there. And so she's maybe working up the same spot as me this summer, which is good.
I love it. It's the next generation, right? It's just, it's such a good, awesome stuff. So Hilary, when the river's blowing out and whatnot, you travel. Where were you off to this year for fishing?
Well, so it's kind of funny. Yeah, I mean, so when we're blown out, I usually try to, that's when I do kind of some traveling around for public speaking things. And then also I'm a contributing editor of Fly Fisherman magazine. So that's when I'll travel for that, or for, any of the projects that some of the brands that I work with are working on. And so, but this year, of course, with the COVID situation, there's just not travel happening. So I started getting really into lake fishing, which is hysterical because I'm telling you all this stuff about the whitewater fly fishing, which is kind of my gig. And then just because of the virus, like, I've been forced to stay home. And I started this interview with you talking about how we have all this remarkable home water that, I don't even get to get out and see. And so that's what I've been doing for the last couple months, is like, we are lucky enough that we're still able to, in our quarantine, go out and fish and, without really even seeing a soul. So I've been prospecting a ton of local lakes and have gotten super into still water. So learning new rig ups and learning how to, get my balanced leach patterns just perfect. And, just that kind of thing has been new for me. But it's also, I can already tell, like, definitely helping my guiding in general.
100%.
Just being able to, and I feel really like silly that I haven't been to a lot of, like, I mean, like, I guess I have always been a bit of a stillwater fisherman, just whenever it happened to be the case, but not getting into it. Like, it hasn't been my gig. So, so now, like, have been super psyched on that just because of the no travel situation. And then I think after that, I had so many trips planned that I've got all these flights that are on reserve. That the events got canceled, or whatever it was that I was supposed to go do got canceled. And so now I have all these flights that I have to take that are non-transferable. And so I've got, they extended them out for 2 years now. Fortunately, the airlines did. So it's going to be kind of planning for what to do with those. So we'll see. I don't totally know yet. But won't be until fall or winter. I do hosted trips and that kind of thing too. So that's like a fall, winter, early spring deal.
Well, hopefully we can all get back to that moment. I know we've lost out on some trips as well. So absolutely. Hilary, before I let you go, where can people find you at so that they can book a trip?
Yeah, well, like, first thing in the morning. Usually they're at a local coffee shop or like out on one of the trail systems. Oh, you mean digitally? Actually, that happens. Like if you come to my town and ask around, they'll be like, "Oh, she's making copies down at the library or something like that." I don't know.
95.
Yeah, you can. You could just ask for me, and somebody will know exactly where I am. Usually, they'll be like, "She's probably sitting at the bridge, like after taking out, at a takeout bridge and having a beer or something." So, but it's I'm super easy to find because I've got the only fly shop here in Columbia Falls. It's a guide shop, and it's called Larry's Fly and Supply, Larys, short for Hilary or Hi Larry. Just silly. And that's my shop, kind of on our main strip in Columbia Falls. And so that's Larry's Fly and Supply.com. And then you can find me up at Glacier Anglers in West Glacier as well. And so it's, pretty easy to track down. Larry's Fly and Supply is probably the easiest way. You go to the website, you can see email there, and pretty easy to find.
And social media is outside. What is this social media account?
Yep, Outside Hilary, and it's 1L, Outside Hilary, Hilary.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make sure I put all those details within the show notes as well. Hilary, any last words before I let you go?
No, just thanks for the chance to talk about whitewater fly fishing. And kind of this area is definitely unique and bucket list for a lot of people, but it's also quite accessible. And if people are worried about flying, it's an easy drive. We got interstates coming right towards us. So I think it's as soon as it's safe, as soon as the park opens back up, as soon as people feel confident that they've gone through their quarantine process, and then as soon as we don't have the quarantine rule here anymore, gosh, I look forward to seeing everybody back here in Montana. And it's just a weird, different zone, and I like being kind of the person to help people experience it.
Perfect. With that said, Hilary, I want to thank you, and listeners, I want to thank you guys as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Guided Podcast, sponsored by Scientific Anglers. If you like this podcast episode, please let us know and leave a review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And remember, subscribe to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast to get even more episodes of both Guided and the Fly Fishing Insider each week. See more at flyfishinginsiderpodcast.com.